All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Opposite of Cheating podcast. This is episode 48. I am your co-host, Trisha Bertram-Gallant, and with me today is Craig Zilles. He is a professor at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and Craig and I met a few years ago when we were starting up a computer-based testing center here based on what they've been doing at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. And so we're going to get into that later. But in the meantime, I just want to welcome Craig to the podcast.
Thank you.
So I gave a slight, tiny little introduction to you. Why don't you tell folks a bit more? I mean, you're a computer scientist by training, right? So how
Sure.
did, kind of, what is your wild trajectory in terms of where you started and where you're at now?
Yeah, so I've gone through a bunch of different paths to get here. My undergrad degree is actually mechanical engineering, and I joke that robotics is the gateway drug between mechanical engineering and computer science.
Hmm.
So I have degrees in mechanical engineering, electrical and computer engineering, and finally my PhDs in computer science.
Oh,
I studied computer architecture as a graduate student, and that's what I started doing as a faculty member and got tenure doing that. And then sometime after getting tenure, I got really much more interested in how we effectively teach students at scale, that computer science departments were growing, you know,
rapidly.
rapidly at the time. And, I ended up I guess, taking the training I received in computer architecture, which is all about how do you take a finite amount of resources and optimize some process given
Mm,
those resources and applying that to education because that was the challenge that seemed really compelling to me at the time. That I think back to as an undergrad, I took a course in psychology and found it really fascinating and that what I do now, which is sort of the intersection of computing and education, really
yep.
loves me to bring my love of the technical stuff to my love of like how people work.
Yes. And how people work is just so darn complicated, which is
Yeah,
why we are still
fascinating.
studying it and trying to figure out trying to figure it out. So a side question before we get to the academic integrity one, computer architecture, for those that don't know, when you say that, I think, oh, you're one of the ones to blame for artificial intelligence because that's all about architecture, no? Or am I wrong?
Yeah, so computer architecture really like a lot of what we study is like how do you make computer systems run fast, like all the good things like lower power, running fast,
Yeah.
cheaper, um,
Which is not
you
what the
know,
current large language models are doing. They're running,
well,
well, they're running
yeah,
fast, but they're running
so
very expensively with a lot of compute power.
yeah, but it's really been enabled by computer architecture. So like the design of the existence of GPUs sort of that's computer architecture. And
Okay.
so the ability to run, an enormous number of calculations in parallel
Yep.
is sort of what the GPUs have enabled. And AI found a way to exploit that
Yeah.
to build, Gen AI
Yeah. So it
as
is
we
your
have
fault.
now. It's not my fault, but yes, like that certainly computer architects are part of the
Yeah.
enabling, process. And I'll say that like I am an AI optimist, sort of long term, that I'm really excited about the potential for every student to have an individualized tutor. I think there's a lot to um, you know, be gained from that. And like, I think the cost trends are such that, we will have, powerful intelligence that we can give to everybody. But it certainly does create an enormous problem in the short term, right around assessment, which is, exactly where this
Yep.
this podcast is focused,
Yeah.
that, it's getting really hard to know what to do with work that students do outside the classroom.
Yeah. To know what students know and can do. Yeah. Um, okay. So before we get into that, let's do the academic theory question. So your first memory of encountering this idea or this value of academic integrity.
Um, Yeah, and I guess multiple ways. Like so, certainly, as a faculty member, you have students. Like there will be some students that end up cheating, and you'll catch some of them. I think in computer science, because we can write computer programs to look at the
Yeah.
students' work, and often they're submitting their work in a digital format. It makes it much easier to find it. So we find that computer science departments generally on, have the most academic integrity, cases on campus. And it's not because computer science students cheat more. It's
Right.
just we're better at catching them.
Yeah.
So that's probably my first experience. But the way sort of I think about it is like, I have, a strong sense of fairness, and so,
Mm,
I don't think it's fair. But my ultimate goal as an educator is for the students to learn stuff. And so, if they're cheating, then they're not actually learning stuff. And
yeah.
so, um,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah. So I mean, it's such a, do you remember any stories? Like, do you feel like you learned about academic integrity when you were younger as a student, or you only learned about cheating? Like, what's wrong,
Oh,
kind of not being a bad boy, not breaking the rules.
yeah, I think that's, yeah, I guess I don't like, um, yeah, you're asking, do I have any positive memories of
Exactly,
academic
because
integrity?
very few people do, because we weren't really talked to in an affirmative matter about how important integrity is as kids. At least I don't remember ever getting that.
Yeah, like I certainly don't have a hallmark experience,
No, I think that's a
around
shame.
that like, I think in general, like, there's messages that I had growing up of like, being good
Yeah.
and whatnot. But I think to some extent, like school, came somewhat easier to me than probably for some people, and so maybe it was less
Mm,
of a concern. One of my beliefs is some of the challenges in higher education is that the people who run it are the people who would do well in whatever environment, and
yeah.
so we're like, oh, I learned fine from this, terrible pedagogy,
Right.
it should work. And so, we tend to carry things forward when,
Yeah.
the science says, oh, actually, no, we know better how, most people, end up learning.
We have a lot of learning science to help us with that. As my co-author David says, don't teach the student you were, but teach the students you have.
Yep,
Yeah.
completely.
Okay, so you we need to talk about computer-based assessment. So when I'm going out and giving talks to folks, I'm really honing in on a lot of what Australia is doing. They talk about a two-lane approach. I don't know if you've heard of it, but they talk about
Oh,
open, unsupervised assessments. Those need to be formative assessments for learning. In fact, University of Sydney is the banning of AI on those assessments because you can't reliably follow up on it. And so then if you ban it, some students will follow your rules and some won't, and therefore it creates unfairness. And so those should just be open assessments, and you should still ask students to disclose their AI use so they can start to think about their metacognition around that. And then when you have to prohibit or you have to know what aids the students are using, then you need to secure that assessment. And so I've been talking to folks about all the ways you can secure an assessment. And, that might be an oral conversation. That might be a flipped classroom where students are doing the activities in class and you're there and their peers are there and there's accountability. But it also might mean a computer-based assessment center. I would put that in the highly secure, in a continuum method. Um, and it's funny because depending on who I talk to, I get some people say yes, and usually it's STEM folks. And other people I talk to say, but I just want to trust my students. And I say, you can trust that they're human, and you shouldn't expect them to be superhuman and resist that bag of chips that's on the counter. You should take the chips away and help them be what they want to be, which is honest, respectful, fair, and trustworthy, right? And so we're finding a really well received, our computer-based assessment center in particular is being very well received by students and faculty. So tell me, from your point of view, you've been doing this work a lot longer than I have. Um, why do you think every university should have a computer-based assessment center?
sure. Yeah. So I think there's two arguments, and the academic integrity is only one of them.
Hmm.
So that wasn't actually the main motivation when we
Okay.
started. So we started it mostly for scale, that we had gotten to the point where, we had classes that are hundreds of students,
Hmm.
and we had figured out how to manage many aspects of the course at that scale. That, I was doing active lectures in large lecture halls. Sometimes I might have to teach the lecture twice, but like if you teach it back to back, that's doable. We could scale discussion sections and labs by hiring more TAs. At
Hmm.
that point, we were doing online homework, and so students were submitting their homework, and we were, because it's STEM, we were able to do a lot of auto grading. The
Yep.
major pain point was the exams that basically every time you ran an exam, it was like your whole week was focused on running the exam because you
Right.
had to write the brand new exam and then you had to, make reservations in lecture halls and you had to tell, which students to go to which lecture halls
Hmm.
because we were doing evening exams and then you had to sort of, marshal your TAs and print a bunch of paper and, bring the paper places and it just was such a production and then the grading and risking losing papers. And then you have to deal with the conflict exams because invariably some people get sick
Hmm.
or they have some conflict. And it's just this,
Yep.
it really was a whole week. And so that was causing people, myself included, to not run very many exams. So we'd have these big, stressful
Yep. High
exams for the
stakes.
students, high stakes. And, I was hugely influenced. There was a talk when I was a young faculty member of somebody who came and introduced me to the concept of second chance testing, where you give students an opportunity to retake
Yeah.
the exam. And that was a huge, like I bought into it right away.
Yeah.
I'm like, this just makes sense to me. The only reason I wouldn't do this is how much effort
Logistics.
it takes.
Yep.
But I did it. We sort of, we figured out how to make it happen. Um, but, you know, part of my realization is that like when we were running paper-based exams, we were running exams based on what we could do, not what was good for the students. And so,
Mm-hmm.
um, my colleague in physics said, uh, running an exam is such a huge pain. Wouldn't just be convenient if we just had a room that whenever the students wanted to, they could sort of show up at the room and take a test. And um, and he was thinking with paper exams,
Mm.
but I was like, oh, with computers, we can do this. And so I got some seed money from our College of Engineering to prototype this computer-based testing facility. So working with a couple of colleagues, we prototyped it and it worked remarkably well.
And by
So
prototype, you mean like in one class, a couple of classes?
yeah, so it was one class. We
Yep.
basically there was a computer lab that was free in the morning, and so
Yep.
we set up like 10 times a week. So it was only 40 seats in this computer
Yep.
lab. My class was 200 students, and so we
Yep.
couldn't have them take it all at the same time. And
Yep.
so we started from the very get-go of doing asynchronous exams. So the students make a reservation.
Mhm.
They pick one of the slots that we have available to show up and take the exam. Um, the and we use a lot of randomization on the exam to do that. So we've been doing that. It was mostly a scaling
Mhm.
tool
And
and a
mastery
lot
based to allow mastery based testing.
mastery based. And so a lot of the courses that use our testing facility now will run many small exams and often run second chances.
Mhm.
And the students love the flexibility. They love,
Yep.
more smaller exams. So it's good for them. We
Yep.
have we have data that shows that this improves learning.
Yep. And reduces
Data.
equity gaps, right?
Right. So, I think in particular, the second chance retake exams is really good for equity.
Mm.
And so that was the huge motivator. And like, the undercurrent the whole time was like, oh, well, of course it has to be secure. Like, faculty aren't going to delegate the running of their exams to you if you can't keep it
Yeah.
secure. But when Gen AI showed up, we were like, oh, okay, fine. We're just going to sort of, we already had this thing that worked remarkably well that, a bunch of courses, maybe
Hmm.
it used to be like 50% of their grade came from exams in this trusted facility, but, now maybe it's 60% or
Yeah.
something, like we've slowly, that there's less signal in homework. So people are reducing sort of the grade percentage of the homework. I've been advocating the thing you were calling this two-lane thing, and I love that analogy. And so I'm gonna steal that language. But the ability to have trusted assessments that sort of, the buck stops there
Mhm.
really makes the formative thing work. That if
Yep.
we like throwing small numbers of points at students to do formative activities because we
Hmm.
think it shapes their behavior. They're more likely
Yeah,
to do the practice if, it just sort of helps them schedule it into their
it
lives.
does. Yeah.
But they're going to take it more seriously if they know that they actually have to learn the material because they're going to have to go somewhere and show that they've learned the material.
Yeah. And they start to spread that. So when we first started our well, not when we first, our second after our pilot, and so
Hmm.
our first real quarter of doing the computer-based assessment center, um, an unnamed prof, I won't name the course of the prof, said that like a quarter of his students failed
Yeah.
because they didn't take it seriously, that they couldn't basically cheat and still pass the course. And but then they spread that message, and he didn't have that problem again in the second quarter that he used the center. Students said you have to do the homework if you to learn the material, or you have to learn the material to make, so that,
Yeah.
yeah,
And that's one of the reasons I love the second chance testing is because
yes,
my belief is, you can go first day in your class and tell all the students like, okay, here's how you should study in this class
yeah,
to do well. And they're like, blah, blah,
blah.
blah,
I
and,
don't need that.
so you got to let them do what they're going to do,
And fail.
fail,
Yeah.
and then have an opportunity to come
Yes.
back. Like in that moment, they will do more metacognition than like any other time of their lives,
Yeah.
and we've seen that, so having that first failure very early in the
Yeah.
semester so that there's not so much material that they can't come back
Yeah.
and giving them the incentive to fix it like is wonderful. And again, like, when exams are cheap, you can do that.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, and yeah, and you can't do that in the classroom. You're every class period you'd be doing testing, right? And so you need that to be done in an outside place. And I'm known around here, and I think within the UC system at this point, of saying like, I want to get faculty out of the business of administering tests. I don't think it's a good use of your time or your
it's
talents or
not.
your TA's time and talents, frankly, right? Standing, doing all the things you said, plus standing there proctoring, which, let's be blunt here and say most faculty and TAs don't do a good job of proctoring
Right.
because they've never been trained on how to do
Right. They don't
it.
have a
And
lot of experience. Like it's not only that their skill set is better used to
yeah,
do other things like the actual one-to-one interaction with
yeah,
students, like the teaching part,
yeah,
but like having a separate trained workforce that's proctoring
yeah,
exams, like, yeah, to me it makes enormous
yeah.
economic sense.
And when there's
Um,
only 45 kids, you can actually check for the Ray-Ban Meta glasses. You
yep.
can check for IDs. You can do all of those things on the secure side of it. You can't do that in your 200 plus person classroom. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what about the people who say, well, okay, that's all and good, but we should just get rid of exams because exams are horrible and they're not, they're stressful for students. What say you about that? And frankly, a lot of those same community might say, and we should get rid of grades. So it's kind of a, yeah,
Yeah. So I think they're only stressful if you make them stressful. Like
yeah,
I think, like there's some inherent stress, but like, learning's hard. Like at some level, we need some pressure to make us do it
yes,
because we're all human. Like I love the exercise analogy to learning that
hmm,
many of us want to be healthier than we are. We
yes,
want to go to the gym more. We want to eat better. And some of us have realized that we don't by ourselves have the willpower to do that. So
yeah,
we hire a personal trainer that's going
right,
to be like, okay, here's the plan. This is what you're going to do each day. They're going to set
yeah,
the system and then they're going to try to hold you accountable.
yeah.
And so um, most our students are in universities because they want to learn. And,
And they want to
I
learn in
think
a structured environment, right?
right. Well, I think they need the structure environment. Like most
Yeah,
people, like libraries have existed forever. Like it's not like the knowledge is only in universities. You
right.
could go learn all this stuff, but many people benefit from the scaffolding that
Yeah.
the university system provides. Um, so, you know, I think exams don't have to be stressful when you have many small exams and you
Hmm.
offer retake
Retakes.
opportunities. They don't have to be stressful, but I think at the end of the day, you want the students to be able to do the stuff. So again, I'm coming this from a STEM world, but
Yeah.
like having a conversation about how to write a computer program doesn't tell me whether you know how to write a computer program. And so I want if I'm going to give you a credential saying you know how to program computers, I need to be able to assess that.
Yeah.
I think I have less to say about the should we get rid of grades altogether. Um, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about that
Okay.
because I don't think that that's likely to happen in my lifetime. I think
Yeah.
they're a useful signifier in many cases, although maybe they're getting less useful with grade inflation because
Mm,
everybody's getting a bunch of A's.
yeah.
Um, but like at some level, employers want some signifier of what we think the students know and that the students want to have many of the students want to have a signifier saying like that they know stuff, and so
Yeah.
um
And to
that I
what
think
level
there.
they know it. Yeah. I mean, I'd love to get rid of the credit hour system. I think it's, the fact that, we have 10-week quarters, other schools have 12-week, 14, 16-week semesters, proves that it's a logistical thing. It's not a pedagogical thing. And so even though we're giving students a chance to retake, we're still saying you have to do it with this limited time. I'd love for us to really think about moving to competency-based education and away from that artificial time constraint on by when you need to learn this stuff.
Yeah, I think my only pushback on that is I think there's like, so I'm a strong believer in residential universities, and I
Yeah.
think part of the value is that you
Mm.
have cohorts of students going through the same experiences at the same
Mhm.
times. And so, yeah, I completely agree. Like, it's frustrating the artificial constraints of like the
Yeah.
end week semester, but like I think, compared to completely sort of asynchronous courses, like I think if you had a residential university where everything was self-paced, it wouldn't be the same environment that
Mhm.
you have those shared experiences of sitting down with somebody that that is doing the same class, studying
Yeah.
together and whatnot, and um,
Yeah.
that's where friendships come from and things like that.
Yeah. Speaking of that, so when we first started up the center, I had a professor in computer science say to me, I really love it. I love the mastery based. I love the retakes. I love me not standing and and my TA's not proctoring exams. The one thing she was worried about is that cohort thing. She said, I have been able to, in my class, celebrate with the students the the completion of a class, an exam kind of thing. It's like we worked really hard for 3 weeks. We took an exam, the class passed, and we kind of celebrate in the class. And she says, I lose that when they all take it at different times throughout the week. Have you thought about that or heard anybody else say that or experienced that yourself?
uh, like it does lead to, like, it can lead to a little bit of detachment. So an interesting thing that sometimes people describe is uh, students feel like the tests or the faculty members less adversarial, like that the test is happening in the testing center. It's
Yep.
not the professor giving the test. Like,
Yeah.
they feel like the professor is more their ally, and then in the context where the professor is like giving the exam.
Hmm.
So I think that's a positive aspect of it, but I think
Hmm.
there is the potential for a little detachment, which,
Hmm.
that there's nothing that stops you from being engaged with your exam, but, you're not forced to. That has to be a choice. And just
Yeah.
like our students, faculty live busy and complicated lives. And so, if we don't have things forcing us to do things, sometimes we reallocate, our energy elsewhere.
Hmm.
Uh, but
And so what have you, so we're painting this kind of rosy picture of this in a way. Like if you're not doing all that you had to do for paper-based exams before, you have time to maybe, teach or meet with students. How have I know you're pretty busy, being an evangelist for computer-based assessment centers, but when you are teaching, how have you changed, what you spend your time on? Where do you now spend your time that you're not spending it on exams?
Yeah, so we still spend it, some on exams in that, we're no longer rewriting all of our exams from scratch every
Yeah.
semester. Instead, we've developed, for every course that's doing this, there's a question bank, and often we try to, again, especially in STEM courses, we try to write question generators. So it's a piece of code that will parameterize or configure problems so you get slightly different versions. And so, I'm a huge believer in this notion of question generators because it allows us to give our students as much practice as they want, that we basically, and sort of do mastery oriented homework where you can try a problem, you get immediate feedback on whether you get the answer right or not. And then if you get it wrong, we can show you the answer and we can say, would you like to try another version of the problem? And so the student can keep it
Mm,
tempting. Um, and so instead of that effort that we would have spent like sort of writing brand new exams every semester, we will typically be like, okay, what thing did I do least well last semester? And we're going to direct energy into sort of writing better problems for, that section. So better problems that they can use in formative assessment, and that we can use in summative assessment.
yeah.
So to me, uh, there's a lot less, you know, grind of just sort of like generating stuff and throwing it away, that we're incrementally building a better and better course. Uh,
Mm,
but we've also seen, so the experience that we had in a bunch of our, this is mostly like freshman and sophomore level courses that use our facility because
okay.
they're sort of the largest, many of the largest courses in our
Yeah.
college
And
as
they're the
well.
foundational
They're
courses.
foundational, and so
Yep.
so a lot of what you're doing is learning these small chunks of procedural knowledge. Like, can
Yep.
you take the derivative of this function? Can you analyze this circuit? Can you write a piece of code that does
Right.
X? And those are things that exams are remarkably good at testing.
Mhm.
Um, but as our enrollments went up before the CBTF, these courses that used to have more open-ended activities tended to get rid of the open-ended activities because they just didn't have the staff to keep
Yeah.
doing them. And by offloading a bunch of the routine assessment to the testing center, that we can use our staff to reintroduce a bunch of these more open-ended activities.
Mm,
So to me, like, I'm a huge believer in automation, but only where automation makes things better. So,
yes.
so for me, like, web-based homework allows me to give immediate feedback to students on whether they understood the thing or not, so they can keep trying it.
Mhm.
The testing center allows me to run more frequent exams and do mastery based. Like those
Mhm.
things, the automation and the systems that we've built make things better. But like, the I don't think that, everything gets better with automation. I'm not a big believer in MOOCs or, things like that, for example, that, there's things that humans do better, and like, having that one-on-one tutoring with students, I think inspiration that, like going into your class and being like, isn't this stuff really amazing?
Yeah.
Like, I don't think, somebody can replace a good instructor, in their ability to inspire the students. And so the motivation, the automation allows us to shift the humans to do those things that
Human
humans
to
do
human.
better, so we get more time for that.
Yeah, the human to human stuff. That's what I've been kind of preaching as well. So I have two follow-up questions that I think are really important for folks to hear your response to. So I mentioned the two-lane approach earlier. Part of that two-lane approach, sorry, I mentioned the two-lane approach earlier, and you mentioned a lot of the classes in the computer-based testing center are first and second year, large classes, foundational classes. So in the two-lane approach, they talk about because secure assessments are more expensive in many ways. Either you're doing a one-on-one, oral assessment with a student, or we're running testing centers or what have you. They suggest that not every class needs to have secure assessments, but there are some ways maybe we can do milestone or benchmark um, secure assessments. And so what I've been thinking about is in a discipline, figuring out what are your foundational courses. The students need to know how to do that without the assistance of AI or other aids. Those should be secure. All the assessments in that, not all, but the majority of assessments in them should be secure. And then maybe at the upper division level, you do more of the milestone benchmark. So after these three classes, you take a secure assessment or something like that. Have you thought Have you thought about that at all in terms of and capacity? We can't fit every course in the computer-based assessment center at this point.
At this point, but like, so I think the answer there is like you you can build more, right? Like that
Hmm. I
if
could.
this is the thing that's needed, like, it's not that expensive. Like, our operating costs are, I think, on the order of like $2 to $3 per exam,
Hmm.
everything bolted in. So like given the amount of tuition money the students are spending, I can afford to give them, 10 to 15 exams,
Yeah.
and that makes economic sense. So I would say deploy it where it makes sense. But I think you're right. So the way I think about the upper level classes is they're often doing a different kind of thing than the
Yeah.
foundational classes. That the foundational classes are giving you these building blocks, and the upper level classes are tend to have you do more integrative activities where you're bringing all the things that you've developed elsewhere
Yeah.
and putting them together, and you're doing bigger things, and maybe you're doing things in groups
Yeah.
and
Solving
um,
problems, doing projects.
solving problems, doing projects, the
Yeah.
things that, might take, a month,
Right.
which we can't sort of proctor you for that whole
Yeah.
month. Like it just doesn't make sense. And um, so we have some upper level classes that will use the testing facility to sort of like, maybe some of the upper level classes will introduce a few new building blocks. And so they'll run exams
Okay.
for those things. But then, there's a lot more project oriented
Yeah.
stuff where, it does require the sort of more hands-on with the TAs or meeting with the groups and
Yeah.
kinds of things to sort of monitor the progress. There are some courses that will use the testing facility as a check of um, like it maybe the course has these longer 2 week, programming assignments that you
Yeah.
do. And then after you do this bigger programming assignment, they'll have you come into the testing center and reproduce some small piece of it. And it's a random piece. So like
Mhm.
if you did the thing, then it's easy to go back and redo a part of
Yeah.
it. But if you didn't, then you can't. And so I think, to me, the big challenge is the kind of work that the upper level courses are doing doesn't assess well. Like, we could
Yeah.
afford, if it made, I think it makes economic sense. It just doesn't make
Pedagogical
pedagogical
sense
sense
necessary. Yeah.
because, we want them to learn to work in teams. We want them
Yeah.
to
Well, and again, secure
do.
assessments can happen outside the assessment center. If the TA is
Right.
closely working with the students, they're going to know whether they are actually learning or
Right.
not. Yeah.
Yep.
And just for folks, we'll put it in the show notes too, but if you're interested more in the two-lane assessment or the way that Western Sydney has adapted it, that's episodes 28 and 36. Okay, one final question before we wrap up. You are an engineer in three different disciplines, and you know how to program. You created we haven't said this yet, but the platform that Craig's center uses and many of our centers use is PrairieLearn. That was created by computer scientists and it is based on programming. So how hard is it for non-programmers to get on board with this, or is there should we be using different platforms for different disciplines in the computer-based assessment centers?
Great question. So one quick clarification, the original PrairieLearn author is a applied mathematician who sits in a mechanical engineering department.
You're all
Um,
here, or
so
you're all interweaving. Yeah.
Yeah, so my colleague Matt West
Matt
is
West
a
was the original
fantastic
programmer.
programmer, and so just to give credit where credit is due,
Thank you.
um, so PrairieLearn is open source software that was developed at the University of Illinois. I claim it's the most flexible question asking platform in the universe. So basically we didn't want to dumb our exams down when we shifted them to computers. And so my colleague Matt built a very flexible question asking platform. And at this point, the exams that I run on computers are more sophisticated than what we could do on paper,
Mhm.
um, because the tool is that good. Um, they're like to get the it is um, compared to an LMS, it lets you do a lot. And
Yeah.
so if you are a capable programmer, you can do, really great things. But we've tried to make doing things in PrairieLearn not require that. So PrairieLearn has this notion of what are called elements, where things that we frequently do will encapsulate so that you can just say, hey, I want one of those
Mhm.
when you're writing your question. And so it takes a lot of programming knowledge to build one of those elements, but once it's been built, then it's pretty easy to use.
Okay.
What we find is it's a little challenging to sort of write a question from scratch, but most people don't end up doing that. They'll find a question that does something kind of like what they want, and they'll
Mm,
make a copy of it, and then they'll edit it. So, we have faculty in a bunch of disciplines besides computer science that are writing questions, and it's
mm.
it's like it's useful to have some programming knowledge, but it's a lot of sort of cut and paste coding. Like if you look at it, it's not rocket science to do, a lot of stuff,
Well, to some of us, it might seem like it. But
Yeah.
we have Paul, let's see what we have outside of STEM in our assessment center. We've had our a writing program. We've had a management program major or sorry course. We've had poli sci course, a couple of poli sci courses now, I think, psych. And so what I've been telling professors is anytime you change something for your class, there's uploaded learning. So whether I was going to flip my classroom or I'm going to
Mm.
change my exams to the computer-based assessment center, it's going to take you some work. That's just the nature of things. What I would like universities to do is provide faculty with the time to do that, whether that's a course release to redesign their course or a TA to help them do that. But it is possible. And what's interesting about it, is even for just writing. So for writing classes that are sending the students, they're sending them for like a benchmark writing sample. And one student that they were talking to said like their writing was actually better in the assessment center than when they were
Hmm.
supervised. And they were surprised by that. And they asked him, and he said, because it was 45 minutes of distraction-free focus. I wasn't tempted by my phone dinging and all of this
Mhm.
other stuff. I could just think about what the question was and just write. And I thought that was really beautiful and gets back to just to end this and circle back to your earlier point. This stuff doesn't have to be stressful. This could almost be a break for students because they too are feeling very inundated and overwhelmed by so much stuff coming at them. And to be able to just focus for 45 minutes these days seems somewhat like a gift.
Yeah, yeah. Just a quick funny anecdote. Students, we've done some interviews with students this past semester. We did it with freshmen in our calc class that were taking their
Okay.
very first exams, and the student said like it was like I wanted to study in a quiet environment to prepare myself for
The,
the test in the CBTF
yeah.
because like it's hard in their normal lives to find like an
Mhm.
actual quiet environment to
Yeah.
study in. But so yeah, I do think that can be a benefit. Just to add one thing to the previous question, there is ongoing work in PrairieLearn to build what you might call a vibe coding
Yeah.
interface where you describe the questions and an AI helps you build the questions.
Yeah.
So I think there's a new release of that coming out very soon, or maybe just released.
And
So
we're
I think,
super excited about that.
yeah. So we do understand that, not everybody wants to dig into the weeds, but
Yeah.
I think the power of the tool is that it's extensible. So like, you don't have to be stuck with just what, somebody else decided the question should look
Right.
like.
Well, thank you so much, Craig. We have to end there, but I really appreciate you coming on and helping to explain computer-based testing and helping explain computer-based assessment centers. And I think the listeners will get a lot out of this episode. So thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.